Imagine for a moment that you wake up tomorrow and the entire world is covered in ice. There are no cities, no roads, no supermarkets, just ice, extreme cold, and the daily struggle for survival. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the cold, folks. It was the silence. When you heard nothing, when the forest was completely quiet, it meant that something very dangerous was nearby. Woolly mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, giant bears. The silence was the natural alarm that warned you. Prepare to run or brace yourself to fight. This isn't a science fiction movie. This really happened 20,000 years ago when our ancestors faced the greatest challenge in human history. A world where every day was a battle for survival, where the slightest mistake could mean the death of your entire family. The world was a completely different place. Giant glaciers covered everything from what is now the United States to Europe. Sea levels were 120 meters lower than we know today. It was as if nature had decided to test humanity in the most brutal way possible. But here we are, right? We survived. Not just survived, but learned to hunt the most dangerous beasts on the planet and escape the most deadly situations. This is the story of how our ancestors became the most lethal hunters that ever existed. 20,000 years ago, our planet was practically unrecognizable. Temperatures were up to 10 degrees colder than they are now. To give you an idea, if it's 77 degrees in Los Angeles today, it would have been 5 degrees below zero back then. But not just in the mountains, everywhere. The glaciers were monstrous. They covered all of North America, stretching from Alaska to New York. In Europe, the ice reached as far south as Berlin. It was as if someone had put the world in a giant freezer and forgotten to take it out for thousands of years. With so much ice on land, ocean levels dropped dramatically. So much so that you could have walked from Siberia to Alaska without getting your feet wet. In fact, that's how the first humans came to America. The Bering Strait was just a land bridge, like a natural road between continents. But what really made this world dangerous was not just the cold. It was the creatures that inhabited it. Woolly mammoths the size of a trailer, with tusks that could pierce a man like he was paper. Cave bears bigger than today's cars, with claws that could break bones with a single swipe. And the most feared of all, saber-toothed tigers. These cats were perfect killing machines. Their fangs measured up to 8 inches and could snap the neck of a young mammoth. When a saber-toothed tiger was nearby, even other predators would hide. For humans, this world meant that each day was a game of Russian roulette. Going out to look for food could be your last day. Every strange noise could be a death sentence, but our ancestors didn't give up. They learned to read the signs, to understand the language of danger, and to become even deadlier hunters than the beasts that threatened them. Can you imagine what it felt like for our ancestors to wake up each day not knowing if they would see the sunset? If this content is blowing your mind, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon for more incredible stories like this one. When the world froze and filled with killer beasts, humans didn't just sit back and wait to die. Our ancestors became the most intelligent and dangerous hunters to ever exist. But it didn't happen overnight. It was a long and bloody process. The first thing they learned was to move like ghosts. Noise was their mortal enemy. A misstep, a twig snapping, and you could attract predators that were miles away. They developed ways to walk without making a sound, as if they floated over the ground. They learned to read tracks as if they were books. A footprint told them what animal it was, when it had passed, if it was injured, if it was alone or in a group, and even if it was hunting or fleeing. These skills literally made the difference between eating or being eaten. But the most impressive thing was how they learned to hunt in groups. To take down a mammoth, you needed a perfect plan and at least 20 people working as one. Some would run toward the animal to scare it. Others would set traps, and the bravest would move in for the fatal blow. They developed hunting techniques that were pure genius. They used fire to drive herds into ravines where they couldn't escape. They built pits with sharp stakes and covered them with branches to trick the animals into falling. They created ambushes so perfect that even the largest animals in the world didn't stand a chance. Hunting mammoths was like planning a war. First, they sent scouts to find the herd. Then, they studied the terrain to find the best place to attack. Then, they waited for the perfect moment when the animals were distracted or separated from the group. When they attacked, it was a display of perfect coordination. Some hunters would use spears to wound the mammoth's legs. Others would throw rocks to confuse it. and the most experienced would look for vital points for the final strike. It was extremely dangerous, but when it worked, a single hunt could feed the entire tribe for weeks. They also learned to use every part of the animal, the meat for food, the bones for tools, the skin for clothing, the tusks for weapons. Nothing went to waste. A single mammoth was like winning the lottery. Food, materials, and tools for months. Do you realize how amazing our ancestors were? They were like Navy SEALs of the Ice Age. If you want to keep discovering fascinating stories about humanity, hit like on this video and subscribe so you don't miss anything. But hunting wasn't enough. In a world filled with deadly predators, our ancestors also had to become masters of escape. They developed survival techniques that would leave you speechless. First, they learned to decipher all the sounds of the forest. Every animal made its own noise, and each sound meant something different. The cry of a bird could signal that a predator was nearby. Total silence was the most dangerous signal of all. It meant something very big and very dangerous was lurking around. They created signaling systems to communicate without making noise. With simple hand gestures, they could convey messages like danger, food, run, or hide. These silent codes allowed them to coordinate movements without alerting predators. They developed shelters that were true fortresses. Not just caves, but structures built from mammoth bones and hides that could withstand attacks from the largest animals. Some of these homes had multiple exits, so if a predator entered from one side, they could escape from the other. Fire became their #1 secret weapon, not just for warmth, but also to keep predators at bay. A saber-toothed tiger could kill 10 men, but it was terrified of fire. They learned to keep bonfires burning all night and to use torches as weapons. But the smartest tactic was how they learned to use the terrain to their advantage. They knew every cave, every tree, and every river in their area. When danger approached, they knew exactly where to hide, where to run, and where predators couldn't follow. They developed camouflage techniques that made them almost invisible. They covered themselves with mud and leaves to mask their scent, moved only when the wind blew to avoid being heard, and used rain and storms to cover their noise. They also learned to create distractions. They would throw stones in one direction to lead predators that way while escaping in the opposite direction. They used smoke to confuse animals and throw them off their scent. When they couldn't escape, they fought like demons. They used spears, stone axes, and even their bare hands to defend themselves. Yet, they always preferred intelligence over brute force. A single human couldn't defeat a giant bear, but a group of clever humans could take down any beast. Have you ever wondered how you would react if you came face to face with a saber-toothed tiger? Do you think you would have the presence of mind to stay still and strategize? In the midst of this epic struggle for survival, our ancestors did not lose their humanity. In fact, it was during these harshest moments that they developed some of the most beautiful cultural expressions in history. But don't be mistaken, friends. Their art wasn't just for looks. It was a survival tool as important as spears and fire. The famous cave paintings at Lascaux, Altamira, and Chauvet were not just art. They were survival manuals etched on the walls. Each painted animal displayed its weak points, habits, and the best ways to hunt it. It was like having a Wikipedia on the wall of your home. They developed a language of symbols that functioned like a secret code. Marks on trees indicated danger this way, clean water over there, or good hunting spot. These symbols allowed them to communicate with other groups and leave important messages for those who came later. Music and rituals became crucial for maintaining morale. When your life is a constant struggle against death, you need something that reminds you why it's worth living. Songs, dances, and ceremonies were not entertainment. They were psychological therapy. They created musical instruments from the bones of the animals they hunted. Flutes made from bird bones, drums crafted from mammoth skin, and maracas filled with stones inside animal bladders. Music helped them coordinate during hunts and keep groups united. Rituals before hunts were incredibly important. They weren't mere superstition. They were a way to mentally prepare for facing death. They asked for protection, honored the animals they were about to hunt, and ensured everyone understood their role in the hunt. They also developed ways to remember the dead. When someone died during a hunt or from a predator attack, they held ceremonies to honor their memory, not just out of respect, but to ensure that their knowledge and experiences weren't lost. Stories became living libraries. Each tale of a successful hunt, every legend of a miraculous escape. Each fable about dangerous animals contained vital survival information. These stories were passed down from parents to children, ensuring that knowledge was never lost. Do you realize that our ancestors already knew that culture and art were as essential as food? If these stories excite you as much as they do me, share this video with your friends and family. The story of humanity is too incredible to keep to yourself. But it wasn't all suffering and struggle. There were specific moments that marked the course of humanity, turning points when our ancestors showed they were more than mere survivors. They became conquerors of the most hostile world that ever existed. The most challenging moment came exactly 20,000 years ago. Scientists call it the last glacial maximum, but our ancestors would have called it the White Hell. Temperatures were the lowest in 100,000 years. Glaciers covered much of the planet. It was a time when human extinction seemed inevitable. Yet incredibly, it was at this moment that humanity demonstrated its true potential. Rather than giving up, our ancestors became more lethal, more intelligent, and more united than ever. The harshest conditions produced the most perfect hunters in history. During this time, they developed the bow and arrow, a game-changing technology. Suddenly, they could kill a large animal from 50 yards away without risking their lives in hand-to-hand combat. It was like going from fighting with knives to having guns. They also perfected sophisticated traps, pits that automatically opened when a heavy animal passed over, nets that closed with a simple pull, and pulley systems made from bones that could lift enormous animals. Their traps were so effective that they could hunt while they slept. It was during this period that one of the most incredible events in human history occurred, the conquest of America. While Europe was still covered in ice, groups of highly experienced hunters crossed from Asia to Alaska. They weren't lost explorers, they were conquerors with a plan. These early Americans were like special forces. They had spent generations honing their hunting skills in some of the most challenging environments on Earth. When they arrived in the Americas, they encountered animals unlike anything they had seen before. It was like fishing in a pond full of fish that had never encountered hooks. In less than 1,000 years, these hunters spread from Alaska to Patagonia. They traversed entire continents, hunting American mastodons, giant ground sloths, and saber-toothed cats that were even larger than their European counterparts. It was an epic conquest spanning 2 continents. The megafauna began to disappear. Mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and giant bears all went extinct. Some scientists argue it was due to climate change, while others blame human hunting. The truth is, our ancestors had become such proficient hunters that they could wipe out entire species. What do you think? Do you believe our ancestors were so lethal that they drove the largest animals on the planet to extinction, or was it just bad climate luck? When we look back at this incredible time, we realize that our ancestors left us lessons that are more important now than ever. In a world that is changing so rapidly, we can learn a lot from those who not only survived, but thrived amid the most extreme changes in history. The first lesson is about total adaptability. Our ancestors showed us that humans can completely reinvent themselves when necessary. They did not cling to outdated ways of doing things when they no longer worked. They were like water. They took the shape of the vessel that life provided them. The second lesson is about the power of teamwork. The most successful hunters were not the strongest or fastest. They were the ones who worked best together as a group. A saber-toothed cat could take down any human in a one-on-one fight, but it stood no chance against a coordinated group of hunters. The third lesson is about innovation under extreme pressure. Some of humanity's best tools and techniques were invented during the Ice Age. When you have no choice but to innovate or die, human creativity knows no bounds. The biggest problems yield the most brilliant solutions. They also taught us that information is power. The hunters who survived best understood their prey and the environment around them. They knew every detail of animal behavior, every shift in climate, and every sign of danger. In a world filled with information, this lesson is more vital than ever. Their management of fear teaches us something fundamental. Our ancestors felt fear, but they did not become paralyzed by it. They used fear as fuel to be more alert, more prepared, and more intelligent. They turned terror into a competitive advantage. The importance of diversity is also clear. The groups that thrived best had a wider variety of strategies, different types of hunting, different skills, and different problem-solving approaches. They didn't put all their eggs in one basket. And something extremely important, they taught us that culture is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Even when struggling for survival each day, they kept their creativity, art, and traditions alive. They understood that being human is about more than just surviving. It's about living with purpose. Finally, they demonstrated that humans are more dangerous when united. A single human was easy prey for any predator, but a group of humans working together could conquer the entire world. This lesson is especially significant now as we face global challenges. When the world froze and filled with the most fearsome beasts ever to exist, our ancestors did not hide. They became the deadliest predators on the planet. They learned to hunt in silence, to escape like ghosts, and to function together as a perfect survival machine. The Ice Age teaches us that humanity is not strong merely because we are physically powerful. We are strong because we can think, plan, cooperate, and innovate. We are the only species that can turn its weaknesses into strengths and its fears into motivation. Silence is no longer a sign of danger for us. Now, we are the ones who make others fall silent. We are the descendants of the most successful hunters in history, the heirs of those who conquered the most hostile world ever to exist. The next time you face a problem that seems impossible, remember your ancestors. They faced mammoths with stone-tipped spears and prevailed. They hid from saber-toothed cats and lived to tell the tale. They turned a world of ice and death into their home. This story reminds us that bearing human blood means carrying the lineage of conquerors. Our ancestors didn't just survive the Ice Age, they thrived in it. That strength, that intelligence, that unyielding determination flows through our veins. When the world was frozen and silence meant death, our ancestors learned to make the ground tremble with their footsteps. That is humanity's true legacy, to turn the impossible into the inevitable.